Good evening. We'll now call the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust meeting of June 18th, 2024 to order. Does anyone else have the wrong date on top of their paper, or is it just me?
It is 2024.
What's this say?
The agenda says 2024, so you're good.
Mine says 2023. It says 2024, right? I mean, okay. All right, item 2 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from May 21st, 2024 trust meeting. We can take a motion. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. The item passes. Item 3 on the agenda is ratification of claims. We can do that with a motion. We have a motion and a second. The ratification passes as well. Brings us to item 4 on the agenda, items for individual consideration. We'll start with item 4A. This is a joint resolution allocating $500,000 in gold bonds to the Alliance contingent upon the Alliance's award of $2.5 million in Oklahoma Air Service Development Grant Program funds for the purpose of bringing new nonstop air service to Will Rogers World Airport. Mr. Mulder?
Good afternoon. Jeff Mulder, Director of Airports. So the item in front of you, as the item suggests, is we're seeking state grant funding for air service development. The state of Oklahoma established this program a couple years ago and making it available to local communities. And it's used for things such as, they're called revenue guarantees. So an airline would pledge to come to a community, and that community, sometimes it's a community, sometimes it's a state, would make funds available to an airline to say, start your service to our airport and community. If it loses money, this is somewhat of an insurance policy that you can then use some of these funds to recoup your losses. And it's an enticement to attract service. We are constantly out there looking for new service, meeting with airlines, and pitching our community. And this is a tool that's been used by other states and communities in order just to give more inducement for an air carrier to start service. And you know, that is a risky operation for a new carrier to start service, especially to a place they may not serve currently, because of the cost to bring people in and set the station up. So the reason we're taking this route, as far as instead of the airport trust providing the local match, is the FAA requirements or regulations don't allow us to fund these kinds of programs directly. It has to come from a community fund, and that's why then we're using this approach.
Any questions for Mr. Mulder?
Jeff, has Tulsa already implemented such?
They have gone through the application process with the state. They haven't applied, they haven't used any funds at this point, but they have, a couple months ago went through this, and the state approved their application. And so the way it would work is we would go through the same process. The State Aeronautics Commission has a meeting in July, so we would take this item to them. And then it would sit there until we had an opportunity. So if we were recruiting a carrier and they agreed to come and they wanted to take advantage of this program, then there would be a tri-party agreement between the carrier and the Economic Alliance and the state to make these funds available. And they would only be used in the situation where a carrier did lose money. If the route was successful, then none of the funds would be touched.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
When you mentioned the carriers, I was just curious, what type of carriers do you look for to try to entice to come? Is there a certain size, or is it just anyone?
So we look at the markets that we currently don't have service to and target carriers for trying to add that new service. At this point, we are in construction to complete a federal inspection station at the terminal building, which will allow us then to have international flights, airline flights, land in Oklahoma City, and they can clear customs in Oklahoma City. That project will be complete by the end of the year. So we are recruiting carriers to start service to Oklahoma City, primarily from Mexico and Central America. We feel that's where the biggest market is. So it would target those carriers. We're also looking potentially for other domestic markets we don't have service to, like a Boston, San Diego, San Francisco is a market we used to have service to before COVID, and United hasn't brought that back. I don't know if it would apply there or we would use it in that case, but those are kind of our priorities, and we have that kind of detail in our grant application to the state, or the Economic Alliance would have that in there.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
All right, if that's the end of the questions, we can go ahead and take a motion. A motion and a second. The item passes. Brings us to item 4B on the agenda, subordination and standstill agreement between the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust, PW Phase 3 Development LLC, and the Baptist Foundation of Oklahoma for the Page Woodson Phase 3 Affordable Housing Project. Mr. Siddle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is on the Page Woodson development, specifically the third phase, which originally was about a 114 unit apartment building, but part of our incentive, this is from an economic development agreement from 2020, that we provided a $950,000 forgivable loan incentive to help make about at least 34 of those affordable. Part of that agreement was always kind of contemplated they were going to refinance this and take out permanent, financing on it. And so we had some conditions in there that we could, continue to subordinate our loan to the primary financing, and those were the developer's not in default, and that the combined total of the senior debt and our debt is not more than 85% loan to value. So I think we verified that we're about at a 71%. So this is just simply providing that subordination to the new financing.
Any questions for Mr. Siddle? All right, we can take an emotion on that agreement. We have a motion and a second. Item 4B passes as well. Item 4C on the agenda is a memorandum of agreement between the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust and the Oklahoma City MAPS Investment and Operating Trust. Ms. McSpadden?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the next three items together, and then, of course, we can answer questions. So items C, D, and E all relate to the MAPS 4 Innovation Hall project. So I've been asked as staff to oversee the operating agreements for 4 of the MAPS 4 projects. That would be Innovation Hall, H.B. Foster Center, Clara Looper Civil Rights Center, and the Freedom Center. And so all 4 of those were granted operating dollars through the MAPS Investment Trust. So as you guys recall, when we did MAPS 4, we set up an investment trust to provide operating dollars. So those 4 projects will receive those operating dollars, and we will have an annual agreement to be able to provide that through the Economic Development Trust. So the first item, item C, is an agreement between the Economic Development Trust and the MAPS Investment Trust for them to provide those funds to us once those calculations are made each year. The item D is an amendment to an existing operating agreement that was signed with Innovation Hall, assigning them as the operator a few years ago. That agreement is between the city, the Public Property Authority, and Innovation Hall, and Public Property Authority doesn't have any staff. And so at this point now we need to kind of hand that over to an entity that can manage the ongoing management of the agreement. City Council and the PPA approved this amendment and assignment this morning, and so this would be the final step to kind of effectuate that transfer. And then the last item is what you guys will see moving forward annually is the annual resolution for the funding. And just so you all kind of have an idea of how that funding is set up, The OCMIAT Trust, the MAPS Investment Trust, each year will determine the level of funding, and it's going to be a percentage of the existing funds, and then it will be allocated proportionally across those 7 or 8 projects that are going to receive those operating dollars. And so it's really kind of a calculation that would be provided to Innovation Hall in this case. They will request whatever level that they need up to that maximum, and then we will issue a resolution kind of providing those funds. And so this is, item E is what you would see ongoing. Those other 2 items are kind of more long-term. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? All right, if not, we can go ahead and vote on item 4C. We have a motion and a second. Item 4C passes. We can go ahead and vote on item 4D. Please cast your votes. Item 4D passes, brings us to item 4E. Please vote. That item passes as well. Brings us to item 4F on the agenda. This is a resolution approving an amendment to the First Americans Museum Foundation's 2023-2024 fiscal year budget for an additional $1 million for operations. Mr. Sudol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a reminder, we had an item back in April accepting $5 million in funds from the state to put some funding for the FAM, both in the current fiscal year and next fiscal year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 items, the next 2 items also, or 4F and 4G. But 4F is the current fiscal year. There's a need to increase the budget by $1 million. Part of that's from some underperforming revenues and some increased costs, and part of that's to put some money in a kind of a working capital fund there. But that's, again, fully funded by this bill that provided money from the State Historical Society. When we get to item G, that's the current year's budget. And so the other $4 million, $1 million goes in this year, $4 million goes in next year, essentially, from that $5 million that we received back in April from the State Historical Society. And on item G for next year's budget, that would, what we think is the planned budget would provide the full funding from the state for the operations of the FAM next year. So, in addition to their other revenues and things that they have. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Kenny, after next year, is the $5 million up for distribution going forward?
Well, I believe it was a one-time funding from the State Historical Society, so that's part of the deal. The original deal was there was some funding put in from the Chickasaws to help, that has been exhausted for operations. This is sort of something that's helped with the current year and next year. After that, there's not other identified sources. It's really, the city's responsibility and the FAM's responsibility to come up with the funding, but I'm sure there'll continue being discussions looking for solutions on that.
Thank you.
Anything else? If not, we can take a motion on item 4F. We have a motion and a second. The item passes. We can go ahead and take a motion on item 4G. This is the joint resolution approving the First American Museum Foundation's proposed 2024-2025 fiscal year budget in a total amount of $4 million. We have a motion and a second. Go ahead and vote. Passes as well. Item 4H is a joint resolution establishing the Myriad Gardens Foundation annual management fee and annual public support for facility maintenance in the total amount of $2,899,620 for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. Ms. McSpadden.
Yes. So this item would approve the annual management fee. Their management fee totals about $2.5 million. The capital piece of that is about $400,000. The management fee is a 3% decrease from last year and represents about 42% of their budget. And as you guys recall, we're trying to get ourselves back up to that kind of three-way split between city funds, program revenue, and fundraising from the foundation. And so we're working our way back from where we had to kind of close down with the Crystal Bridge renovation. So this is a positive increase in that percentage.
Very good. Any questions? All right, we can take a motion on item 4H. We have a motion and a second. The item passes. Item 4I is a joint resolution establishing the Scissortail Park Foundation annual management fee and capital fund support in the total amount of $5,578,588 for the 2024-25 fiscal year. Ms. McSpadden.
Yes, so this is the Scissortail Park item, and their management fee is about $5.5 million. The capital piece is about $120,000. The management fee is a 4% decrease from last year and covers 68% of their total budget. This is a newer park. It's going to take a few more years to get to that three-way split, but we're progressing towards that same goal with them.
All right, if there's no questions, we can go ahead and take a motion. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Item passes. Yeah, you might as well not sit down, I was going to say. Item 4J is a professional services agreement with the Oklahoma City Economic Development Foundation Incorporated for community and economic development services not to exceed $1,325,000, July 1, 24 through June 30th, 25. Ms. McSpadden.
Yes, so this is our annual contract with the Chamber. They provide professional services related to job creation, among many other economic development activities to support our efforts. This $1.3 million contract is about a 3.5% increase over last year.
Any comments, questions? If not, we can take a motion. I have a motion and a second. The item passes. Item 4K is a joint resolution establishing the annual professional services fee in the amount of $620,544 and other additional services in the amount of $123,165 with the Alliance for Economic Development of Oklahoma City Incorporated for the 2024-25 fiscal year.
Yes, so this is the annual contract with the Alliance. They provide centralized leadership for our economic development programs. They have professional staff supporting job creation and tax increment financing, in addition to many other things like the Chamber. Their contract represents a 4% increase over last year. And I'll just make a comment on both of these. The work that they do for us is predominantly staff, and we don't have the ability to provide them an increase in their staff like we would city staff providing those services. So this is, these increases feel pretty reasonable when you look at the increases that we're seeing in staff costs.
Any questions, comments? All right, we'll take a motion on item 4K. Please vote. Item 4K passes. Brings us to item 4L, fiscal year 2024-25 Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust budget. Ms. McSpadden.
Yes, so you each have a copy of the paper budget. I wanted to go over this very quickly, and I thought it would be easier with a paper copy. So the one thing that I want to point out on here that's maybe a large difference that you'll see is fund balance. So if you look at the total of FY25, the $213 million compared to last year's budget of $160 million, the main reason for that is a change in fund balance. Previous to this year, I have taken a snapshot of fund balance in April or May We get our county checks for the TIFs in June. I haven't been projecting that because we don't need it to budget balance our budget. We're not spending that much fund balance. Well, as we move into projecting and allocating for large projects like the soccer stadium that we did this year, I want to be sure that we're demonstrating the capacity to fund those projects. So moving forward, I'll be projecting that year-end fund balance. This year will be the 1 year you'll see that kind of big jump. Moving forward, it should be a progressive increase like you would be used to seeing. I've got a few slides to just kind of summarize the overall budget that I'll go through real quick here. So the first slide just demonstrates the split between kind of our three main programs. We've got our TIF program, our Gold Bond program, General Economic Development. General Economic Development is where we hold all of those contracts, many of which we just looked at. Gold Bond is for job creation, affordable housing, and our film program. And of course, the TIF program houses all of our TIFs. I've got them listed here with the TIF numbers that you all would be used to kind of hearing us discuss. So next, we'll talk about the separation of revenue types. And you'll see, again, as mentioned, fund balance is the largest piece of our revenue budget at 64%. The other kind of portions there that you'll see, the general fund piece is funding those annual contracts that are going into that general economic development section. And next, we have the separation of expense. And again, the contrasting piece to fund balance is that future reserve or reserve for future program costs and debt service reserve make up the largest piece of our expense budget. The next slide is really the one where I think is important to show comparisons. This is our recurring revenue. So I've taken out fund balance on the revenue side and I've taken out the reserves on the expense side. So you can really see kind of the activity that we're expecting to happen next year. We're expecting about $74 million in recurring revenue. That's the ad valorem taxes that we receive from the county, the general fund piece that's supporting our annual contracts, and then those other pieces. And then of course on the expense side, we've got a pretty large piece that's in there for debt service for the debt that we have outstanding, our annual service contracts, which are those that we just kind of went through from the general fund piece, and then project costs that we're expecting to expend throughout the different pieces. The one thing I'll say on that last slide, the $74 million in recurring revenue is projected to be a 7% increase over last year's recurring revenue. And the expenses, on the expense side, the $62 million is about a 1% decrease. And that decrease is really related to our annual service contracts. We had Costco in our annual service contracts last year. They had a $1.2 million retail project that we were working on. It was $1.2 million each year. We closed that out last year, so that decreased that annual contract budget. And that's really why you're seeing a decrease in the expenses. So happy to answer questions if you've got any on the detailed budget or any of these pie charts.
No questions, comments?
I'll just make a quick comment. I appreciate all the charts that help us follow the different summaries, so thank you.
All right, go ahead and take a motion on item 4L. Please cast your votes. Thank you. Item passes. Item 4M, receive the Oklahoma City Economic Development Foundation fiscal year 24 third quarter report. Mr. Chamber.
Mr. Chamber, yeah, that's what it feels like some days.
That's what it
so
says.
thank you. I'll tell my wife that. She would appreciate it. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the renewal of our annual contract. I've said this so many times, but the relationship we have in the city is special, particularly when you lay out the partnership that exists between the Chamber, the Alliance, and the City of Oklahoma City. That doesn't happen in many other places, and the chance to work together with partners and friends every day makes my life a lot easier. I'm going to say a couple things that are not included in the report, just because I think it's relevant and important. One is, as you all have continued to monitor and watch the metrics of Oklahoma City, so too has the outside world. The types and volume of projects that Kenny and Joanna and I are working now are at a size and scope and a scale that we probably wouldn't have even sort of dreamed 5 years ago, which is fantastic when you think about the top opportunities we have in front of us, but also underneath that, the complexities that it raises to think about how we continue to have the right types of tools and inventory in our toolbox. And the ability for us to continue to think about land and building inventory and financial tools is going to be really crucial to how we continue to meet those needs longer term. And I've really appreciated the partner in crime that Kenny has offered to think particularly about availability of land inventory in our marketplace and thinking about where the puck is really moving related to population growth, and thinking about, honestly, conversations that even happened this morning about availability of property on the west side of the market helps my ability to continue to recruit companies and investment to Oklahoma City. If I look at really what happened in the first quarter of the year in 2024, a lot of our work was really focused on continuing to build a strong pipeline, to think about outreach into key sectors and key markets where we continue to generate a certain amount of new lead activity. Our outreach in the first quarter looked at continuing to be very present in the aerospace economy, being very closely tied to folks that have a presence in DC and have a historical relationship in Oklahoma City, and how to continue to double down on that. Think about what they have announced here in the market and what could be in the pipeline in the future. Clearly, our partnership to think about Tinker's growth is a big part of the success that we're going to continue to feed. And we'll be able to also think about outreach going into the summertime, as we were in Farnborough and other places like that where those large companies are very present. Other investment and outreach that we've continued to conduct in a very large-scale way is making sure that our team, along with Kenny and Joanna, are really front and center when we're looking at site consultants who drive a lot of the large-scale projects that make decisions in our marketplace. So many of those consultants have turned over in the last 5 or 6 years. And so introducing this new cadre of talent to Oklahoma City is really important. We've been in market with many of these folks, but we've also been able to invite many of them to have their entire teams come to Oklahoma City. So in this report, you've seen the chance for Deloitte and others to put sort of boots on the ground here. But also in the last couple of weeks, Newmark and their entire site consulting team of 29 consultants with a global footprint were here in the marketplace, just understanding really what's going on here and how they can relay that information to their clients. So if you kind of wrap all the things that are happening up at once, for us, it's continue to stay in front of the baseball, particularly on land and building inventory, particularly land inventory right now, making sure we have the right tools in partnership with Joanna and the fund balance that you just described to make sure we can really think about how we can creatively assemble deals, and then also stay in front of long-term projects as well. If you look at outcomes, we had, I think, 876 jobs were announced in the first quarter of this year, which is pretty significant. It matches up with our goals really for the entirety of the year. And the majority of those were from existing companies. I think 26 existing companies who announced those new jobs. And so thinking about not just the investment we're trying to create from outside, but also the investment that we're curating locally as well. It's just been a good year so far, and I'm excited to continue to march toward the end of this fiscal year, which is going to also, we'll be able to talk about some additional results in July. So thank you for the partnership, and as always, we're really excited about the relationship we have with the city, and can't thank you enough for the continued investment in us as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? If not, we can go ahead and take a motion to receive.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. And the item passes. Brings us to item 5 on the agenda. Any comments from staff? Seriously?
Help myself, you know that. This is your second meeting without a general manager's finance report. There will not be a third. We are getting close to having the data come out of Oracle that we need and be able to aggregate it in a way that we can present it to you. So we hope to have one of those in July.
Thank you. Any comments from trustees? Did any citizens to be heard sign up? No? Okay. All right, that brings us to item 6 on the agenda. We are adjourned.